Good evening. I will call to order the Finance Buildings and Grounds Committee meeting, which was duly noticed on November 15th, 2024, through posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin Statute 19.84. Anyone has a safety message to share?
I have one.
Okay, fire away, Jim.
Now, you have to picture this. So my son's moved and we gave him certain things out of our utility room, and of course, I don't want to move things twice, right? So I'm going to wait till we get the stuff back from my son. So in the meantime, I trip over the stuff that I put out there and fell into my drums and some other stuff in that. So I guess the moral of the story is I should have put it back.
That's good, that is good. I didn't actually prepare a message because I didn't know what to per se, but thank you, Jim. And the message that I have, and one of our engineers commented that he lives in, I think, Stoughton, and it come down to Janesville to go to Sam's. And as he was leaving, or entering, yeah, he was leaving, and he was taking some of a back road, however he was going. But a particular person was pulling out of their driveway, and he would have T-boned him if he hadn't have stopped, as the person is bracing to, because they're thinking they're going to get hit. He sees the phone in their hand, so clearly they had been on their cell phone and not paying attention. So, and they were in their driveway, so it was distracted leaving. I can't even say driving. So that is one where, as steadily as we see things happen with people and phones, we just have to be hyper vigilant and look for those unexpected things, because people do the darndest things. Forget kids, people do the darndest things with cell phones. So, but thank you for sharing, Jim. That's always a good one. You knew where you were at and what you were doing.
It was good.
Well, you knew, good to share.
My fingers, I can't get my ring out.
Oh, okay. Is there a motion to adopt the 2019-24 Finance Building and Grounds Committee agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye. Oh, psh, as quick as I forget.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's easier. Keeps me in target too. Ooh. All right, presentation of the fiscal 24-25 year-to-date, September, October financial summaries. Considered and moved to the full board. Mr. McCray.
Thank you, Commissioner Ardrey. And Commissioners, real quick, right, we know our financials are not always that particularly exciting, but just a few key points. If you take a look at the October financials, right, you'll see, thank you, approximately $11 million in state revenue, right? And so just as a reminder, that's really the September payment. So you'll see it in September, you'll see it again in October, but we're not duplicating. And really why I wanted to highlight that, right, is when you take a look to the column to the left of the fiscal year to date, is you will not see a lot of revenue for October. Right, I'll kindly remind the commissioners, right, that the full board took action on a line of credit when the budget was adopted. We'll be needing to tap, we actually have tapped that line of credit because we do get really thin on cash, right, this time of the year until that December aid payment, equalization aid. As a highly aided district, approximately 62%, right, of our revenue comes from the state. That comes 4 times a year. Right, and the remaining balance, the 38%, comes from local taxpayers, and we'll begin to receive those receipts in late January and in February. Keep in mind, we used to get more in January, but when there was a change between the city and county in terms of actually executing tax bills and collecting tax revenues, right, that pushed our tax receipts back related to local property taxes to really more February. We receive everything, but we will get, again, rather lean in cash come January. Right, so I just, again, try to remind you, right, I think everyone knows this, right, essentially of our cash flow without necessarily illustrating our cash flow. right, just in terms of how our revenues fall. And of course, because we have a balanced budget, right, our expenses fall rather periodically, for lack of a better term, right? They're rather consistent. So we're certainly here to answer any questions that you may have.
Is there a motion to move to the full board for approval?
Slow down.
Second.
Okay, it passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Next, information on district issuance of a bond anticipation note. Mr. McCray.
Yep, absolutely. So a quick introduction to Mike Clark from Baird. We've been working with Baird almost 5 years now in terms of issuing debt, helping us manage our debt, bond anticipation notes. That will be the consideration for the board in December. Mike's going to outline that. We've really, and I should probably pause for a moment, you'll get a second thank you when we get into the long-range facilities planning, but really for our community and for the commissioners, we certainly thank their support on both the operational question as well as the facilities related question, right? So later on in the presentation, you'll hear a little bit more about, we'll say, the architectural and engineering aspects of the presentation and kind of what the high-level plan is in the near term. Right, so right now we're going to focus on what Commissioner Ardrey referenced was a bond anticipation note. Mike's going to go into some detail about that, how a bond anticipation note works. Commissioner Johnson, 3 of the commissioners on the committee have the experience in terms of creating a parameters resolution, adopting a parameters resolution. We'll hear maybe just a hint about that, but that would certainly be something in the future that we'll discuss. So there's a lot of to-do items related to a bond anticipation note and the issuance of bonds. So think of it as your own home mortgages as on steroids. So there are compliance issues. There are just lots of borrowing considerations, and I'm really taking more time probably than needed, but I'll certainly turn it over to Mike to kind of give, again, a high level and what our next immediate action step should be. And then certainly feel free to ask Mike questions or myself. Thanks.
Welcome, Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Congratulations on the referendum results. Overall, it was a very good referendum results for school districts around the state, and not for everyone, but for majority. So it was nice to see. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is an initial financing, or potentially an initial financing for the referendum projects that were approved. The bulk of the financing plan, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, because we're just talking a few weeks removed from the referendum itself. We look at draw schedules, project schedules, various things that will kind of determine how the rest of the financing plan may lay out. Something that's different from the last referendum the district passed is the interest rate environment in terms of your ability to earn more interest on the proceeds of the debt, and that creates an arbitrage situation. So that's where we're going to start the discussion tonight. So if you open up at the first page, and I will apologize in advance for some of this material, but it is what it is. It's when we ever talk about IRS requirements as it relates to some of these things, it can be a little dull. So I'll try to move through it as quickly as can, but please ask questions. So basically what arbitrage is what I just described is the IRS gives you the ability to issue tax-exempt debt, which lowers your interest costs, lowers the cost of the taxpayer. What it doesn't want you to do is to issue low tax-exempt rates and just turn around and invest it and make money beyond a certain point. So you are allowed to earn interest on these, and then again, the interest you earn on these dollars can only be used for one or two purposes. One, to pay debt, or for additional projects within the scope of the ballot question, which in your case is fairly broad, so it does give you some latitude there. So for example, if your arbitrage yield is 3%, and it's a calculation similar to your rate on your debt, but a little bit different, but very close to it, and you earn 4%, that 1% difference is the arbitrage return that you're generating. And you are allowed to keep it in certain circumstances. So, but basically, this is put in to remove the incentive of borrowing more, as I described earlier, than you need, or when you maybe borrowing more than earlier than you would need to. You have an option of yield restricting. So saying your ARB yield is 3%, you say, well, we're just not going to invest in anything above 3%. That eliminates the arbitrage. Or if you do earn above that, then you have potentially the option of just writing a check and sending it to the federal government, which I'm sure they would appreciate, and for the amount that you're earning above the 3%. But there are some ways to avoid that. And one of them is a temporary period, and there's a couple of provisions in there that if you borrow certain amounts within a calendar year, you get more liberal time period to spend the funds down. So one of those is temporary periods is if you borrow, if you get 3 years to spend the money. In most cases, given the size of referendums, a lot of your spend downs are 2 years, but there's a provision that allows you to get a 3-year spend down. And all you have to do is encumber 5% of the proceeds in the first 6 months, and then you have 3 years to spend the money. So you can, and if you, at the end of that 3 years, you spend all the money, you get to keep all the interest you earned regardless of how much you were over your arbitrage yield. And if you don't spend all the money at the end of 3 years, then you can still keep the money that you earned, but then at that point you do have to yield restrict it, meaning you have to, if your allowable yield is 3%, you have to lock in your investments no higher than that 3%. And so that's what the ban, what we're going to talk about in a minute, is hoping to do, is to capture that 3-year spend down. So if you go to the next page, federal law tax consideration arbitrage, it says rebate exemptions for capital projects, new money issues. So a small issuer exemption is if you issue $15 million or less in a calendar year. And this would take into account cash flow borrowings, large capital leases, count against that 15%, or $15 million. And then no more of it being for $5 million for cash flow purposes. If you do that, you have 3 years to spend the money. So what we're what we're considering doing is having the district issue a $12.5 million ban, which is less than the 15 million limit, but the district does have a capital lease in place that eats into that a little bit, so we can't do the first 15. So this would be done through a bank placement. We have several districts who are looking to do this. It's quick, given the time frame of the election, and it has to close by the end of the calendar year. There's not a lot of time to go through a full official statement development, credit rating, those types of things. So we're talking to banks in terms of locking in this. And this would be a short-term instrument, and we would likely refinance it sometime in the spring of '25 with what we would anticipate being the next phase of the financing for the referendum. But that small issuer exemption designation would be locked in with the issuance of that $12.5 million ban and having it close in calendar year '24. Any debt that's above the 15 million, and this may come into play for the balance of the referendum, obviously it's a sizable referendum, and we're not going to do multiple years of $12 million borrowings. You're going to need the funds in larger pieces to fund the project. So your ability to capture this small issuer exemption may be fairly limited going forward. And then we'd have to look at timing of referendums, because you have 2 years to spend the money then, and then you have more intermediate targets within that 2 years to meet to avoid paying arbitrage. So we have to kind of work through that. I will say that there may be a time where if we do the math, you see, the district may say, we're just gonna pay, put ourselves out there, and if we pay arbitrage, pay arbitrage, because when you look at interest earnings, there's three components. There's the amount you have invested, the rate you have it invested at, and the duration you have it invested at. So we may look at it and say, you may be better off issuing the balance of your authority all at once, knowing that you're likely not gonna meet your spend down, and knowing you're going to pay some arbitrage. But if you have, $140 million-ish invested for a longer period of time, even though your net in-pocket rate is lower than what you actually could earn, that may make more sense. Because you'll be able to generate more interest and keep it than if we would spread the borrowings out over, say, 3 years in smaller pieces where you only have $40 million at 4% versus, say, 3%, and you have just fewer days. So we'll work through that, but, and we'll be back, I'll be back as we develop those plans and kind of talk through how those numbers work. But just since we're talking arbitrage, I wanted to touch on that aspect of it, because that is going to be a consideration for not only this first phase, but also subsequent phases. So the next, the interest rate chart that kind of highlights, what's causing this situation. It happens periodically where short-term rates are above long-term rates. So you can see that the 2-year treasury in kind of the reddish maroon color is above kind of using an index 20-year borrowing rate, and that's what's causing your arbitrage situation. You can see that for majority of the time going back to the mid-90s, short-term rates are below long-term rates, and there's not an arbitrage situation, which was what happened with the last referendum. So it's just kind of where we're at in the interest rate market that's creating this situation. So as far as the financing plan, at this point, we would anticipate we're planning on bringing to the board a bond anticipation note through a bank placement that will lock in $12.5 million of authority, get you that 3-year spend down on that amount. And I would anticipate this would be some of the last money that you spend, so you may invest it for 2 years. And I'm sure that you already probably have contracts in place that meet that 5% of the 12.5, so it's not a big hurdle to get over, to give you the ability to invest and keep that invested for up to 3 years before you have to spend it. Future financings are they're gonna depend on the draw schedule, which we don't really have a firm draw schedule yet. Arbitrage considerations that I just described in the interest rate market. So if we get a really strong interest rate market, meaning lower rates, it may be more conducive to lock in at those low rates from, and take advantage of that situation, knowing that it might create an arbitrage situation. If we get to the point in the spring and you need some money for the summer of '25, beyond the 15 million, or excuse me, the 12.5 million, we'll likely be doing another borrowing and also refinancing the $12.5 million ban as part of that. And then we make the determination, well, when's the next borrowing that may need to take place to meet the needs of the projects and try to avoid some of the arbitrage situations. But, there's a lot to kind of work through before we make any of those recommendations at this point, but those are some of the factors that we'll be considering, so. With that, are there any questions?
And I know it's too early for us really to understand the draw, and I understand what this means for us right now.
Right.
So then I'm thinking about, so as we look at the next steps, and the draw schedule is of the, and I'm just gonna round off and say 150 million, easy math. Then we'll, based on your recommendations and where the interest rates, well, do we take it all or do we break it into 3 steps? Because we know it's gonna take us years to complete the
Yeah.
work and actually do that. Factoring this in, I guess I'm just trying to prepare for what's next, and maybe I'm just too early to.
No,
to
I
think through
mean, it's a
that.
fair question. I would anticipate that we'd be doing another borrowing in spring, probably early to late spring of '25 for funding of projects, because probably likely that there's some projects the district would want to take advantage of the summer of '25 to fund, and once you start projects, the invoices show up very, very quickly and can be significant amounts. So we'll have to, the district will work with the architects and contractors involved to get it estimated when they're gonna need, what the expenditure schedule looks like. And so at that point, we'll likely have to make the determination, do we just borrow for the projects that would allow the district to avoid arbitrage? Most likely keeping within that 2-year spend down. Now, if they only need $12 million for that summer, we could avoid it, but I don't know how likely that is. Or do we issue it all and then knowing that you'll pay arbitrage or likely pay arbitrage, but the fact that you have millions of dollars invested for a longer period of time, even if you're netting a lower rate, is that a greater benefit to the district? And those are the types of things we'll work through. But I do anticipate a borrowing, in the first quarter of '25, based on typical schedules. And so, once we get those schedules, we'll be able to give you a better idea of amount, timing, those types of things. This ban will most likely be, we're having different conversations with different banks, a 9-month note with a 30-day call, a 12-month note with a 120-day call. So we will have some time, but at some point, the short-term note will have to be refinanced. But I think it's very likely there'll be another financing in early '25.
Okay, thanks, that helps. So in just typical draw schedules, is it, and I know it's probably all over the place, but is it, well, maybe I'll ask you differently. Is it a limited, do we have to draw it all by X point? So can we do it in 4 draws, 3? Does that matter?
Well, there's 2 factors. You have 5 years from the referendum date to issue debt. You have authority is good for 5 years, which I'm sure is ample to whatever scenario kind of plays out, get the money in place. The other question is, as we've been talking about, in terms of your ability, since we are in a positive arbitrage situation, and you're earning, and you will earn significant dollars regardless of how you do this, but which way provides the best return as we look at those investment options of the proceeds, whether you pay arbitrage or not. Now, which one's going to generate the most dollars? Again, those dollars can be used for additional projects within the scope of the ballot question, or used to offset levies for debt payments, so to help make the debt payments. So it'll be clear once we get the draw schedule and we lay out some of your options and project out some, and again, they will be projections, because if I could tell you where interest rates are in 6 to 12 months from now, Baird would have me doing something else, and I probably would not be standing here tonight, but I can't. So, whenever you make, a plan, it's based on what you know at the time and what you feel the future holds within reason. And we'll lay out options for you, and I think it'll make it easier to kind of understand what that means net to the school district.
I won't say one last question, but I have one that comes to mind yet.
Sure.
And is there any financial ramifications for the district with the time frame in which we, I'll say, complete the referendum spend that the taxpayers had given us, plus whatever we've earned? I mean, I know it's 5 years to issue the debt, but do we finish in 8 years or 10 years? Or is there some in place that you have to be done with that referendum?
No, but theoretically, you could issue debt, 2 days short of the 5-year benchmark. And if it's a $12 million issue, you would have 3 years to spend the money. But even if you don't spend the money at the end of the 3 years, then you would just yield restrict for the remaining life of the expenditure. So you could have, realistically, there's no end as long as you wouldn't earn above your arbitrage yield. Now, there is the other side of that in saying that, okay, the voters voted for some projects that you said you were going to complete. There is probably the expectation, I think the bigger driver will be the expectation of having those projects completed in a reasonable amount of time so that the students going through the district can benefit from those. There are situations, such as I'm working with Racine, where, they approved a long revenue stream, and we're borrowing against that over time. From the first project to the last project's completion, you're probably looking over maybe a 7-year period of time, but that was what the expectation was, and what was communicated to the voters is this is going to, that referendum that passed by 5 votes, was going to give the district the ability to monitor needs as they went along. Foxconn is not coming, so that's, when it first went to referendum, that was still something that was anticipated to some degree. So obviously, that's a different situation. In your situation, you've kind of identified some projects, things you want to accomplish, and the taxpayers and residents and students and parents probably have an expectation of having those projects completed in, a more near-term basis as soon as possible, so.
Thank you. Mr. McCray?
Thank you very much. So Mike, this is really for you. If you could just maybe share with the committee and for our viewing audience, what we modeled, I believe was 5 1/4, and where market rates are at. I know you had a slide.
Yeah, so if we were issuing today, rates had dropped, and actually we were getting a few issues done just under 4%, probably about 8 weeks ago. Issues that we've completed in the last couple of weeks have been closer to 4 1/4 to 4.3%. We use 5 1/4%, so we anticipate, very good result for, for the taxpayers of the district relative to what we anticipated. We generally are conservative. We have had situations, so it would have been the presidential election in 2016, where we did see right after the election, interest rates increase within 8 weeks of over 1%. Now, over the next 2 months, they came back down, but, that's all, always kind of an unknown. And we are ways away, we're months away from issuing the first portion or all of the issue, depending on what decisions are made going forward. So rates can change further. But I think we're well positioned to deliver a very good result for the taxpayers.
And just maybe a follow-up with that. Can you speak to, and I alluded to it, most likely in the spring, you mentioned first quarter, but the concept behind a parameters resolution?
Yeah, the district, and some of you may recall this conversation in terms of how the debt is is sold, because when you're looking to lock your rates in, there's really a couple of different ways, and we talked about this. You can pick a board meeting and say April 16th. I have no idea if that's a board meeting date, but let's pretend it is. That's the day we're gonna sell. And you make that decision maybe 3 months in advance, 2 months in advance, and think, well, that's our day. And you get bids that day, and you may get a good bid on a bad day. You don't know what that day looks like. The parameters resolution is the board would pass a resolution outlining criteria that have to be met for the sale, but they also assign to 2 people, typically, can be more, but 2's the typical number. Typically maybe a board member and, superintendent, business manager, those types of things. On behalf of the district, the ability to lock the rates. So it creates a window of time that you can say, okay, we're seeing some good results in the marketplace. Monday, Tuesday, we're gonna try to lock your rate that same week on a Wednesday based on sales. And we show the sales results that are occurring and say, okay, this is a really solid week. And we can lock rates so we're not necessarily tied to a particular board meeting date. That's how the district chose to sell the debt, and we'll have more, we have time for more conversations around that. The other thing to keep in mind is that, especially in the first half of '25, is there's going to be a lot of Wisconsin school district debt hitting the marketplace. So, you're gonna, your rating's very solid, you're gonna be very attractive in the marketplace. It's gonna be a larger issue possibly, and that's gonna bring in, more, different buyers. And so, I think you're positioned to get a good result, even given the volume of Wisconsin school district debt hitting the marketplace. But maybe having that flexibility for parameters resolution gives us a bit more flexibility to time that sale, avoid some more congested times, and take advantage. But again, we'll have more conversations around that as we get close to actually issuing a long-term issue. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
Okay, nice seeing you again. Again, congratulations. Anything else?
All right, next time you guys got to be ready for questions. Not just me. All right, next, 1.6, update on long-range facility master planning. We talked about finances, we got to talk about what we're actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Superintendent Holtzman and I could probably tag team this a little bit. I know I only put 5 minutes on the agenda. Allow me some grace, right? It's probably a little bit longer than that, but not much longer. So we'll quickly go through, and again, we're at 30,000 feet at this point in time. We'll touch on some of the items that Mike discussed, right? And we'll just kind of give the committee, again, a 30,000 foot perspective on the upcoming time. Right, so again, I think we said it. We probably cannot say it enough in terms of extending our appreciation and gratitude for the community supporting 2 questions. An operational question, really the oxygen in which our district needs to operate on a day-to-day basis, as well as an investment in the community's facilities. So again, with much gratitude and thankfulness to the community for their support. And speaking of that, I just threw up some very raw data relative to the November 2024 election as compared to November 2020. Right, so building improvements, 63% favorable, operational, 60% favorable, and there were approximately 31,500 votes for each question. So I didn't work the polls. I believe your fellow commissioner did. I did some kind of anecdotal data digging, right? So typically, when we compared the presidential election across 4 wards, I only picked 4 wards in the city of Janesville, they were anywhere from 30 to 100 votes more for the presidential election than they were casting, right, for the referendum question. Now, is that because it's on page 2? Is it because maybe we had a particular office individuals were only focused on? who knows, right? But there were certainly more than 31,500 people who voted across the ballot. Ours just happened to be in that neighborhood. It's really just about 400 more than what participated in the 2020 election, right? To which we saw 67 approve building improvements and 55% on the operational. So more growth in the operational, not so much in building improvements, but still very, very good community support for the School District of Janesville. We'll kind of shift gears here a little bit. So what did we learn? Right, so Mike referenced an earlier borrowing. We did that in 2021. Real quick, that was at 90 basis points, right? It's a great interest rate to, borrow money, not so much a great interest rate to earn on those deposits. We'll most likely work with a proceeds management entity. We currently work with WISC. There are 2 other players in the marketplace. We want to be able to leverage the best interest rate when we do receive bond proceeds to benefit the district. Right, so there are 3 current players right now. WISC has been a valuable partner, but it's really up to us, right, to leverage the most. When we receive the initial $12.5 million band that the board may consider in December, we'll most likely deposit that. It's a small amount, odd to say that, within WISC, but when we issue the larger bonds, we really want a good competitive price for earning interest on that. Neither Matthew Sylvester Knutson, our Director of Finance, myself, nor Superintendent Holtzman are going to be driving around the state of Wisconsin looking to place CDs. So that's the benefit of a proceeds management company, is they do that on our behalf. But I digress. So let's take a look at what did we learn from our past projects. Right, so we have really great partners in both Cullen and EUA. So I think it's important to emphasize that. There are certainly others. Right, we can talk back to our survey partner, we can talk back to our communications partner, but when we're building things, right, it really falls to Cullen and EUA and their subcontractors. When we took a look at improving our security, right, we targeted building mechanical systems really to complement the learning environments. That was our focus of 2020, and yes, we're still tackling some of those projects to this date. Right, so building secure pathways are complete, our boiler work is complete. You may recall, right, we still have, and we'll review that in a little bit, other projects to wrap up those dollars. I think as we go through the process, right, we're always looking to improvement and how we can improve upon our processes. Right, so I want you to think for a moment about the scope of the work that we did in 2020. Right, we touched every building. When we look forward to the scope that we'll be tackling, is we touched every building. The 2020 referendum, right, essentially focused on secure pathways, boilers, right? This is going to be much larger, and what I was about to say is we did that in 3 phases, right? We will have more than 3 phases on $151.8 million worth of work, right? And so there'll be a meeting later on this week. I'll hit that in just a moment. I'm not sure we're there to solidify the phasing, right? Phasing then, when we talk about or listen to what Mike had to say earlier, is you have a draw schedule, right? And so we'll get into that a little bit, but there's really a lot of merging of different thought processes and ideas as we execute the work. We're always working to improve our communication, right? I can't stand here and say communication in phase 1 of secure pathways was to the same level it was in terms of being good as it was in phase 3, right? So just please keep that in mind. And then really a huge shout out, or a district-wide project is huge. I shouldn't say a huge shout out. And I just alluded to it earlier, right? It's going to be even bigger, and our approach to managing and performing the work certainly needs to be better, right? And so we're having some initial discussions in terms of how do we manage that work, right? Essentially improving the student learning environment, improving our facilities for community use. How do we do that even better, right? So big fan of Deming, right? We're always interested in learning how we can be better. Just as a reminder, I'm sure the committee gets this, right? But for our viewing audience, phase 1 is going to be one of many phases. And that's not phases, and I'm using phases perhaps a little too liberally here. We have this project, which will be in phases, which is part of a long-range facilities master plan. We're in phase 1 of that long-range plan. And phase 1 will be broken up into different micro phases, right? So it's important that the community, and I believe you as a committee understand, right, is we're doing a lot of work above the ceiling tile, in the walls, in the basements, right? So if you drive by Adams, it may look very similar in 4 years, other than perhaps windows, as it does today, right? So we're not changing the facade, We're not extensively remodeling classrooms, right? We're not extensively remodeling, the landscape features of the buildings. That's not what phase one is about. It's mechanical, electrical, plumbing, Americans with Disabilities Act compliance. It's those things, important, but not necessarily very visible, right? So as you're out in the community, right, please continue to apostolize that, right, in terms of above the ceiling, in the walls, building infrastructure. And Mr. Millard, as a former facilities technician, right, certainly understands that. Phase one, I just touched on, right, is part of a $919 million identified maintenance and educational adequacy needs. $151.8 million is absolutely huge, but it's not much of the overall need that this district is experiencing. Right, and so just as a recap a little bit, right, 124 million of 578 million in identified maintenance work. Right, so that's kind of what we're working with, and 27.3 million will really be used to address special education and additional security measures, and that's the composition of the 151.8. And then our work will most likely take up to 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years. And that assumes, right, no major supply chain disruptions that we experienced in 2021 and 2022, and a little bit into 2023. We are still waiting on a transformer for the work at Franklin, and it'll be here this next summer. Right, so, you can still get eggs at the grocery store, right? You can still order off Amazon, right? But we still have some supply chains, right, that are rather constrained, but not to the level that we experienced when we were doing our secure pathways. I believe Superintendent Holtzman shared a memo with you, right? This is also outlined in that memo, right? So think about our phase is going through schematic design, design development, construction documents, building construction, right? And then obviously the project is complete. And there's many sub-layers to those larger layers. When we talk about schematic design, right, that's really where we're engaging our building leaders and our district administrators. Right, so we've already began at a high level to have some of those discussions with Kim Paraboom as an example, relative to our special education spaces, right? Then there's also building engagement with our principals, right? So schematic design, EUA nor JP Cullen come with a cookie cutter approach and saying this is the solution, right? The solution is somewhat organic. Now there's a conceptual understanding of a solution, right? But there's not a defined solution at this point in time, ergo schematic design, design development. Construction documents become bid documents. Bid documents then allow contractors to procure. Procure begins construction. Construction then towards completion. So kind of give you some kind of high level examples really in terms of how we're kind of thinking about grouping the work. And again, there'll be a kind of an administrative meeting. I know Commissioner Ardrey has expressed some interest in kind of being, an ear, so to speak, of what's going on. But let's focus first at our capital maintenance and kind of scope and schedule. That's our 2024 referendum. There's going to be a core team, right? So really the core team consists, if you will, of individual building leaders, are there to advise, right? Superintendent Holtzman referenced, okay, the building principal probably isn't going to be picking out square D panels for the electrical distribution system, right? So not a lot of engagement there. Right, in that type of work, and that's kind of the type of work we are, right? So, but still, they're there to kind of advise and be brought along and be communicated with throughout the process so they understand the work that's being completed within their building, right? So the business services group, right, which is essentially facilities, finance, right, is really kind of a little bit of the decision makers, right? Because we'll be working with our contractors to square D panel there or square D panel there. Right, so plumbing fixture, what's that plumbing fixture look like? What's parts availability? Is it a Kohler product? Is it a standard product? Like those are things, right, we'll be working with our architectural engineering and construction managers on. That's on the capital maintenance side. When we look to our internal security measures, and we've already had one initial meeting with Dr. Beyond from Craig High School, right, as well as Chris Medenwalt, right, and then our safety and security consultant, Craig Clements, right, so we're part of that meeting. There's when a drawing comes to that type of meeting, it's really just more or less more than a blank piece of paper, right, to begin to expand upon the brainstorming process in terms of how do we address our internal security measures. right? So again, it's not dictated, it's very much, here's some paper, here's some ideas, let's start flushing those ideas out, what works best within your building. And I'll give you an example. When we talk about internal security measures, right, our vision here is not necessarily myopic to where it's about doors, right? So we have to consider our camera systems, our door access systems, right, our fire egress systems, right? So we're really taking a look at a composite of the environment, not necessarily we're putting in doors, because we also have to understand the traffic flow of the building, and who better understands the traffic flow of the building, right, than the building leaders themselves, right? So they're engaged, they're there to advise. When we need a decision, right, so we'll lean heavily on Craig Clements, Kim Perenboom, Student Services, right, and Business and Finance and Facilities, right? So there are some, well, what type of decision do we need to make? We're not going to abandon Apex. That would be a decision. Apex is our current camera platform. But is there a particular software in terms of how do we integrate everything together? And we're going to then engage Brian Erskine, Craig Clements, building leaders from an operating standpoint, right? So there's a lot of discussions that occur, but eventually sometimes we may need to make a decision, right? And so we'll lean on Craig, we'll lean on Kim and her team, right? And we'll lean on facilities, but that's kind of a little bit about how the decision process works. And I wish I could give you a better example, but when it comes to high school security, right, that's why we engage Mr. Clements. We're going to really rely heavy upon him. So we also are taking a look, well, this is other sites, right? Sorry, I hit it again. Just kind of really a repeat of Craig and Parker, right? And then let's move to special education, right? So my wife is a physical therapist. Shocker, I am not. But when we talk about special education, and in particular the spaces, right, we have OT, PT, speech language, and perhaps some other services that are provided. It's really Kim and her team, Thea Murphy, right, as well, right, that oversee that aspects of our operations. We need to engage them, right? So someone can't say at the building level, well, I don't want a swing in my physical therapy space. So who's the decider on that one? It's going to be Kim and her team who will say, you will have a swing in your space, right? I don't think any of our building principals are going to say that, but that's just a very elementary example of Kim Perenboom, right, who oversees student services, special education, OT, PT, SLP, and the other services, right? It's her decision, right, in terms of the functionality of that space and how that space is designed along with building principals. But, right, Kim represents the overarching service delivery of a district. Building principals are there to execute it, and from a facility standpoint, we're there to ensure that it meets all the codes and other requirements from maintenance and so on that we need to undertake. So that's a little bit about kind of how some of the decision groups are, right, and how we will really be approaching our work. Questions for either Superintendent Holtzman or myself?
Seeing none, roll on to the next topic, update on 2020 referendum and ESSER-funded capital projects.
Okay, so not quite student nutrition yet, but we're getting there, right? So Liz will do an excellent presentation. Tammy, and a good shout out to Tammy Carlson, right? She's excellent. She's our fiscal analyst grants manager. And just as a reminder, right, she has overseen about $20 million worth of ESSER grants in the last 2 to 3 years, right? So she's still working on closing some of that up. So that's why she's unable to be with us this evening. And then Dave Leader has a family commitment. I know last month he had a family commitment. I'll have a very stern conversation with him about his family commitments and why he shouldn't be at the finance, buildings, and grounds committees. But no, we certainly understand that. So I am pitch hitting, but the good thing is I'm fairly engaged. So real quick, in terms of an ESSER, you have the memo. I'm just going to highlight some of the reminders. And I referenced this already. The switchgear is still on schedule to be installed during the summer of 2025 at Franklin. So we're operating. It's just the last newest piece. And if you have a technical question about a switchgear, I'll kindly refer to Commissioner Ardrey. As we look at Craig and Parker High Schools, right, so occupancy has been granted by the city, right? I with regret, right, is we essentially were not very timely on the execution of this project, right? Our agricultural teachers, right, have been hampered in terms of things that they would like to do in the first semester, right? And so we're very well aware of that, right? So as quickly as we can get them in, we will, right? But it hasn't been a burden for them, and we need to recognize that. We do have still some outstanding issues, right? So we have some grow tables, right? We actually wanted flathead screws, right? But they didn't come with flathead screws, so we got to work through some of those nuances. I think Commissioner Millard would appreciate this, as someone suggested, well, can we have our own maintenance staff just change the screws? And it's like, well, that's not what we paid for, right? They have other work to do within our buildings, right? So we need to go back to the vendor and ensure things such as that are corrected. We have a watering wand, right, with some sort of massive power head, like that's blowing the leaves off of plants. We can't have that, so we have to reconfigure that. So like any project, right, if you've ever done a home remodel, right, or if you've ever built a home, right, we're like so close, but we just have some of these lingering nuisance items that we still need to close the book on. Fund 46, just as a reminder, and I think you toured, like all the windows are done at Edison. And actually, let me go back to some of our work at Franklin. Again, I lauded our two partners, both EUA and JP Cullen. We are so close with some minor things. The building is functioning well. But we're working with Cullen, we're working with our subcontractor, right, just to tidy up some of the roof items, right? And we're working with our mechanical contractor to tidy up the boiler room and just some missing items that were not captured on the initial punch list, right? So we want to own it, we want to recognize it, and we want to correct it and make sure it's done to our satisfaction, right? So again, I know sometimes there are whispers in the community, right? It's best that we own it, recognize it, and look to close that out. So let's go back to referendum update. Yes, we still have funds available. Something that's interesting, and certainly appreciate Brian Erskine, our Director of Technology. We were originally looking at about $1 million, right, in our overhead paging system. It's going to be much more than that. So most likely, we're not going to be able to execute that element of the program district-wide. It was a next-level project, not necessarily part of the core question that we asked voters in 2020. So we'll have to navigate that and see if we can't also provide some solutions as we look to the work that we're doing as part of the 151.8. The building automation system is currently underway. Now the building automation system, right, just to kind of quickly recapture, is think of that as your central nervous system, right? That's what we use to run the building, right? And so we're changing it from Andover to Tritium Niagara, right? From a pneumatic system, which is air, to digital, which is wire. Right, and as we work through those items and convert, there's other types of associations, but why is your neural system important? Why is the building automation system? It runs the building mechanically, and even when it comes to security measures, we can integrate that into the building automation system. So as we're working with Craig Clements, as we're working with our building principals, as we're working with secure pathways within our building, right, secure corridors, all of that begins to integrate together. And last but not least, you know, we continue to, I think we have bids. We do have bids, I should say. I shouldn't say we think we have bids. And then we'll be beginning in this next number of months our work to replace the entire systems rather than just the head-end equipment of fire at both Harrison and Marshall. And this is a prelude to December 2025. Right, is we'll come to you with a list of anticipated capital work. We've kind of taken a bit of a pause, right, in bringing that list forward because we've been so consumed with everything else going on. But you'll see a major initiative relative to referendum work and beyond related to roofing in December 2025. And that's that report.
Thank you, Mr. McCray. Next item, student nutrition update.
Right, so, you know, when Liz is one of my direct reports, I get to laud her and her team. Megan Martin, right, and Monica Berkheimer and Liz Liedl herself. Liz is going to give a very high-level overview of her program. That was on our agenda that we shared with the committee, just kind of targeting November. There's some very exciting things going on in student nutrition. I think we need to take great pride in the fact that we self-opt that program, meaning it's our staff, it's our program. We don't contract out to Aviance, Taher, Marriott, or any other type of entity. So I'm not going to steal any of Liz's thunder. I just wanted to give her and her team a shout out and recognize the good work that they do throughout the district. Denise took care of it.
Oh, Denise, you're awesome. Thank you. Samples next time, right? Hi, everybody. Thank you for letting me have a little bit of your time tonight. So I just want to give a, thank you.
Sure.
That one? Thank you. I just want to give a brief overview of what we'll be discussing tonight. Some of the things will be our meal participation, our student nutrition DPI review coming up, professional development, and how the menu can impact our participation. So during the 23-24 school year, the Student Nutrition Department provided over 1.5 million meals to our students, plus an additional 400,000 a la carte items. After the school year ends, the Student Nutrition Department transitions quickly to the summer feeding program. This past summer, we provided over 60,000 meals, that's breakfast and lunch, to our children throughout the community at 16 sites and our YMCA. They have their own program, but we're a vendor contract for them. So that 60,000 included the meals at the Y. During the fiscal year of 2023, over 95,000 schools served lunches to 28.6 million students daily. And 90,000 schools served breakfast to 14.4 million students daily. Federal reimbursement for them two programs was over $22 billion. And we provide 4.7 billion lunches and 2.4 billion breakfasts across our nation. The Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction School Nutrition Team will be in the district December 10th through the 12th to complete a review of our breakfast, lunch, after-school snack program, as well as the fresh fruit and vegetable program. And that's a grant that 9 of our elementaries currently receive. Ahead of the school nutrition team visit to Janesville, some of the things they have already or are in the process of reviewing are the district's files for direct certification, free and reduced applications, our menus, our meal participation, Fund 50 expenses and revenue, all of our production worksheets, and once they're on site, they'll review the programs at Adams Elementary, Marshall Middle School, and Rock River Charter School. During their time on site, they will make sure that we are following the USDA's strict nutritional guidelines for our meal programs. Things like weekly minimums and maximums for fruit, vegetables, calories, fat, whole grains, and soon to be added sugar. Our production records function as a receipt to prove that we are using the federal funds as intended, as well as information for any possible recalls. They also document special dietary needs for students with health concerns. And they show that we cook our food to the proper temps and that we hold things at the proper temps as well. Yeah.
As far as the schools that they're reviewing, is it their selection or ours or a combination?
No, they select. So that's based on our free and reduced meal participation. Plus, if a school was reviewed last time, they'll skip that one and move on to the next. So, yep, you bet. Last school year, CFO McRae and I did a compensation analysis for our student nutrition departments. We looked at wages of surrounding districts and also customer service positions throughout the community. And we made necessary adjustments to our staff's wages. With the support of the district's payroll, we also moved our student nutrition employees to annualized pay. Annualized pay has made it more easier for them to budget in those long breaks when students are not in session. Each summer, the SNA Wisconsin hosts an annual conference And the district has been fortunate enough to be able to allow high school and middle school managers to attend that conference each year. During that time, they're allowed to attend breakout sessions of their choice, where they can, they'll teach things like USDA requirements and leadership skills. Not to forget how valuable time spent with colleagues throughout the state can be. Last winter, we also had our elementary site leads, middle school and high school managers come together for a leadership training, during which we discussed the results of a Clifton Strengths Survey. Seeing the common traits throughout our small group of leaders was quite interesting. Even though we have our monthly manager meetings and quarterly meetings for our site leads, where we focus on upcoming changes within our department, it was nice to have that time to spend together on a more personal level. This year, we've actually partnered with a company called What's for Lunch, and Christy White is the owner-operator of What's for Lunch, and she also presented at our back-to-school meeting that you see in the photo on the slide. She'll spend some time in our 17 kitchens as well. She'll start that in February. So Christy and I, we actually agreed that school nutrition needs to be looked at from a franchise approach, promoting efficiency, consistency, and improved quality. School kitchens and cafeterias are restaurants, and we serve our most valuable customers, our students. Christy was an equipment rep for over 8 years, and she saw an incredible need for training based on school nutrition. What's for Lunch now has provided training to 100 programs across 15 different states, and I'm excited for her to bring her experience and knowledge to Janesville. Our students they choose to have breakfast with us, and our menu and great customer service really drives that participation. Thank you to Board Commissioner Johnson for joining us a few weeks ago to see our programs. As you saw, our elementary schools have 2 entree choices each day. Our middle schools have 5 entree choices, and at Craig and Parker High School have over 12 entree options. We also offer a great variety of fresh fruits and vegetables each day, as well as milk to our students. Things like weather and attendance can affect meal participation, and that's out of our control. But each day, we take those production records and we look at them and we track the trends. And even though sometimes we may misjudge, we do have a lot of items that we can kind of over-prepare because those items can be used the next day, like our chicken filet sandwich. We can take that, we can cool that chicken, we can cut it up and put it in a salad or a wrap or on our sub sandwich bar. So there are options that reheat well, some don't. So school meals can significantly impact our students' learning by improving their concentration, focus, and overall academic achievement. A well-nourished student is better equipped to learn due to reduced hunger and distractions. Inadequate nutrition can negatively affect our ability to focus and retain information. And the only thing that a child should be hungry for during the school day is an education. And in Janesville, we do a great job providing meals to all of our students. So, do you guys have any questions?
I just want to thank you very much for a great presentation, but also thank you for that opportunity that I did have a few weeks ago to have lunch with you and your colleagues and, of course, children at the different schools I was at. So thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely, and you're very welcome. And I just want to extend the invitation to everybody at any point throughout the year if you'd like to join us for lunch. If I'm not available, I know CFO Dan McCray will be happy to join you, maybe Superintendent Holzman, are several of our staff. So you are always welcome to join us for lunch or breakfast.
I have joined at least one staff member for lunch on several occasions, but I've not taken pictures to show that.
Was it school lunch?
It was a school lunch.
Good.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful lunch. I'm sorry, anything, Jim? Okay. So from my perspective, kudos to you and your leadership. And as Dan mentioned earlier, one of the things that I continually look for is what can we do to be better? So bringing in, I forget her name, but What's for Lunch shows a move to be better So I just kudos to you for that.
Thank you. We're lucky to have support. Superintendent Holzman and CFO McCray, they're always looking for ways to help us, improve our staff and what we can do, just to make them feel more valued throughout the district.
So as we think about, and I'm not suggesting this, as I was just thinking of the feedback we get, positive, negative, whatever, with respect to the student, nutrition and whatever. And I'm going, so, do we have a longer range vision of what we want to work toward? And if not, just something to think about is to say, okay, this is what we're working on this year. But as we get out 2, 3, 5 years, what do we want it to look like? It could be, make sure we're doing what we're doing, but just as anything from a long-term vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's some districts in the state of Wisconsin, they do a lot of fun meals, such as we did on that first slide with our Halloween menu where the staff, they decorated that pizza to look like a pumpkin. The fruit cup was done as a candy corn parfait, or a candy corn fruit cup. So we really want to start to up that. Up in Patrick's Brothers District, they actually do a surf and turf for the students in those type of meals. And while we can't afford to do that all the time, can we afford not to do it once in a while? So eventually I would like to get there where we're bringing in more scratch-made cooking. And that's where the investment in our staff and our team will really come into place.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not exactly the same thing, but I'm a little bit concerned about, are we compensating our people adequately in this, or is it are we very limited? Any suggestions you have that we can do? And that, more money's always fun, but at the same time, are we really competitive? Are we doing the right job? Because from what I understand, I work a couple part-time jobs and both of them pay more than your people do.
Sure.
And that concerns me, so.
So we are fairly competitive within our surrounding districts as far as the food service student nutrition departments go. What we looked at back in 23, 24 was the customer service based or the entry level jobs within the community. And why we're not maybe quite there yet, we're a little bit closer than we were. But I know when I came to the district originally in 2012, I came from Beloit. So I worked at Aldrich Middle School. At that time, I got quite the raise to come to Janesville. And we're no longer that competitive in that sense. And like you said, funding always plays a key in that. So we do our best to track meal per labor hours and see where we can help boost staff. And I think, again, where that training comes into place is when we work more efficiently, maybe we need less hours to get through the day. And then with less hours, we can compensate more to the individuals that are with us.
It's trading off one thing for another. The individual looks at their paycheck and if you give them less hours, it's more per hour.
Well, it wouldn't be less hours. I mean, less hours in that kitchen. So right now, let's say that kitchen is staffed at 25 hours. As they learn to work more efficiently, maybe it only takes 23 hours. And then we can take that other 2 hours and give it back to the employees that we have. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So again, thanks, Liz. I think just in terms of Commissioner Ardrey's question, in terms of how we're looking forward, Liz and I have had some outstanding conversations related to, is it really 19 franchises that she oversees? We have 19 restaurant locations, right? So Liz does amazing work in her team in terms of tracking production records. Production records help us plan for the next meal, right? So from a fiscal standpoint, right, even from a very boring accounting standpoint, in the past, our practice has been to dump most every revenue into an 800 level account. But are we tracking revenue per location, and are we tracking expenses location, right, to help Liz in terms of making some data-informed decisions, right? So we're not totally there yet, but that's the direction that we're moving, right? Good data allows good decision-making, maybe even some data-determining decisions for Liz and her team. So how do we support that? And again, just to recap Commissioner Dahmerhauser's question, right, is, we've done some progress forward related to student nutrition. Keep in mind, student nutrition is a self-sustaining fund. When it runs in the black, that's great. When it runs into the red, we go to Fund 10, right? And we make that transfer from Fund 10 to break even in Fund 50, right? And then also because we're part of a larger composition, and I don't disagree, Commissioner Dummerhausen, right? But when we look at all of our support staff and our certified staff throughout the district, right, compensation should always be on our mind. It's just difficult at times, right, given constrained revenue sources. The 14.5 million that the voters approved is essentially a status quo. It's not a growth referendum, right? So great questions, and we appreciate that perspective. Just keep in mind, Superintendent Holtzman to your left there, and myself and others, as well as Director Liedl, right, are always looking kind of at that high-level view in terms of what are the organizational impacts to our operations and other considerations. Oh, sorry, one last thing. And we really do appreciate, and we know schedules are tight. Liz and I, right, even before this was on the agenda, have been taking time, if our schedules permit, once a week to go out to the buildings and have lunch. I miss not having a district office in an academic building as I had in my prior districts, right? Because you kind of miss out on orange chicken, right, which is an amazing entree, as well as other items, right? So we were at Roosevelt. That was our first visit early in September. Right, and I'm sure you've all experienced this. Ms. Johnson, to refer back to your recent experience, we're eating with first graders, right? And when you come to student nutrition, you can expect waste, right? So maybe half the burger's eaten, half the grapes are eaten, you know, a few smiley fries are eaten, and that child's ready to go out, right, to recess, right? So that's a good thing. We have a great, you know, breakfast program, snack program, and lunch program. There was one particular child, and I don't know this child's name. There was nothing left on his plate. Now, either he has a high metabolism, or that may be that child's best meal of the day, right? And I don't want to make it a sad sack story, right? But that just speaks to the importance. That child did not leave a crumb, and he enjoyed every aspect of that meal. And I hope he has a high metabolism, and not because it's his best meal, but if it is his best meal for the day, right? I'm grateful to Liz and her team throughout the district, all 85 plus staff members, right, who helped prepare that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Next item, Information Governmental Finance Officers Association, Smarter School Spending. Ooh, that's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. Whoa, excuse me. Right, so we're not going to go into great detail right now. It's really just to kind of plant the seed. I appreciate Superintendent Holtzman's, you know, willingness, right, to work with Tammy, Matt, and myself, right, and have even those broader discussions that I know he subscribes to in terms of ensuring we're aligning our resources to meet our goals as a district, right? So Tammy Carlson and I, about 2 years plus ago, had the opportunity to go to our first GFOA conference, the Governmental Financial Officers Association, right? It's a raucous group, right? We have a great time there, right? You can just imagine a bunch of fiscal people in the room going through professional development. I gave you 2 items, right, within your board packet to read. One was kind of an overview, right? We're not going to go through that overview, but I really kind of wanted to shed some light in terms of fiscally, and again, with Superintendent Holtzman's support, kind of what some of the thinking is, and like how do we continue to work with our partners in student services and learning and innovation in terms of ensuring that we're aligning our limited resources and making, not that we haven't, but just really making good choices. The Smarter School Spending, right, and that's that one sheet. We actually use that tool, right? So again, I appreciate Superintendent Holtzman's support. When we were looking at our ESSER-funded positions and whether or not we transfer some of those from ESSER to an actual local budget, right? So we worked through essentially that 8 criteria. The document is really written to, you can kind of massage it to your district, but it's asking some critical key decisions. You most likely have heard Chris Medenwalter, Director of Secondary Education, ask the question, what does success look like? What data do we have to support the continuation of a particular program? Or perhaps, what data do we have to further invest because it's an underfunded program, right? So it's not necessarily just a how do we improve the bottom line approach, it's how are we investing? Are we investing in our students not the right way, but at an adequate level? Does something require additional investment? Or is it really a program, because we can't be all things to all people, that we maybe don't need to invest in anymore because there's an alternative source or alternative opportunity for that child? Right, so it's just some general high level. These are things we're thinking about. And again, I appreciate Superintendent Holtzman. I don't want to overplay this card, right? It's initial thinking, right? It's not saying the bread is baked and we're ready to serve it, but it's a tool that helps guide our discussion, right? When we are reviewing a program, considering its fiscal implications. And that's really all I wanted to share. And certainly I'll entertain any questions or not.
Here I thought we were gonna hear about how artificial intelligence was helping us in spending our budget.
So actually, so we can touch on that a little bit. I do have to give maybe a second shout out to Chris Medenwalt. So there's a firm that we've engaged as a district, right? Because we have so much data. So the amount of data we report fiscally, the amount of data we report academically, from an attendance standpoint, graduation rates, all the data that we have, right, is can we leverage artificial intelligence, right, to synthesize that data to a particular data point or two that we're most curious about, rather than always pouring through and sifting and willowing and creating tables, pivot tables within Excel, right? So one example may be is, and again, garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure you've all heard that term, right? So if the data going in is really good, then the data we're pulling out should be really good. But then beyond the facts that that data provide, we also have to understand the context, right, in which we're reviewing that data, right? So, Superintendent Holtzman has probably shared with you, right? I am not a baseball player, but let's say that I am, right? And I bat 187, and that may be true. But it's only true against left-handed hitters in the 7th inning, right? Maybe my overall batting average is higher or lower. It's true, but how are we understanding the context of that data and how are we using it? It would be nice to say, so please, based upon the data that we submitted, and we're pulling the AI query out, right, in terms of, so what's the average age of our faculty at Wilson Elementary? What's the average salary of our faculty at Wilson Elementary? What's the demographics at, whether it's poverty, whether it's racial, whatever other demographic information at Wilson Elementary? What's the average tenure? And then maybe do we begin to compare that data to another elementary, right? Because as we're looking to align resources and as we're looking to align, and that's just really the fiscal standpoint, let alone the academic data, right? And the barrels and barrels of information we have academically related to student performance. So AI is on the horizon, we're embracing that, and hopefully some good information to come.
It was a leading comment, so thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? Board members?
So Ms. Jensen said I have an hour and a half, we have another 12 minutes. Are there any questions?
Our next item is future committee meeting items. Anything that we want to cover in particular? Okay. Well, so as I mentioned last meeting, Dan and I, with the schedule he's laid out, we review that and go through that, and then it's whatever additional items that have come up. So we will continue to do that. Next meeting is when? Are we third? Do we want to go third Tuesday?
Yep, 4 to 7,
Christmas Eve?
17.
17th.
Did you want to discuss time?
I do.
Yeah, 3 o'clock.
Does 3 work?
3 is better for me.
3 o'clock.
Ooh,
There you go, should ask that earlier.
yeah. Well, I did last time.
Okay.
Somebody changed it.
Alrighty.
Well, I gotta make a CISA meeting yet tonight.
Thank you all. We are adjourned.
Good